Okay, and here we go, everybody. So, hi, I'm Emma Douglas, Head of DC at Legal & General and Chair of the PLSA Policy Board. And I'm delighted to be joined today by my colleague, Peter Jackson, who is Director, Group Data Sciences at Legal & General. Now, previously, Peter was Chief Data Officer at Southern Water, and prior to that, Head of Data at the Pensions Regulator. So he is no stranger to pension challenges. And before joining TPR, Peter spent 17 years providing data strategy consultancy, working with large multinational organizations and blue chip brands. Peter has also written 2 books. So he's the co-author of the Chief Data Officer's Playbook, and Peter's second book, Data-Driven Business Transformation, was published in March 2019. So I'm still waiting for my complimentary copies, but I say this every time and they never turn up. So if we could move on to the first slide, please, Jim. So it really is an exciting time in pensions because from being relatively late adopters of the tech revolution, we are catching up quickly and learning from other industries about what has worked and why. And if we're able to use data science and technology effectively, I do think the opportunity to improve member engagement and outcomes has never been greater. And one thing that I've learned when working with our clients to drive those member engagement activities and improve member outcomes is it's really important to be able to see all the data and information that we have available across our applications in one place. Now, we know that looking at data in isolation rarely provides the full picture. So I love this striking example that Peter's given me to use. Here's a beautiful picture of a beach, just like something in a travel brochure. Now, remember when we could go on holiday to places like this? If you just click forward for me, Jim, if we move away from that narrow camera angle to see the full picture, you can see the waste piled up, mainly plastic and flip-flops by the look of it. So there's clear evidence that most successful engagement strategies are powered by an array of data points. So how are we bringing all of our data together across all of our applications? So I'm going to hand over to Peter to take us through that.
Thank you very much, Emma. Thank you for the introduction, and I'll make sure we get the books to you as soon as possible.
Thank you very much.
Jim, can we move to the next slide, please? So picking up on what Emma has said there is absolutely crucially important, is bringing together multiple data sources so we can see the big picture. And what we have here is an example where we have brought at L&G multiple data sources together and presented them out into a digital platform. This is actually a browser-based platform. And you can see by looking at this, in the top left-hand corner, there's data coming from call centers and customer service around customer SLAs, service level agreements. And on the right-hand side, top right-hand box, there we've got data coming from our digital estate around customer online registrations and digital engagement. The other 7 boxes are perhaps more of what you would expect, sort of standard pension scheme data. But again, it's quite an array of data from members through to funds and investments and opt-in rates and membership. So what is important here is that we've lifted data from multiple operation systems and we've put them into an environment where we can access them at speed and repurpose that data and blend the data together, because that's where the real trick comes, is in blending the data together. But also, this approach has allowed us to iterate. And I'm quite sure, Emma, you and I remember what the first version of this platform looked like. It didn't look anything like this, and it didn't have that array of data. And what we've done over the last 12 months is add in more data sources and present more data sources out into the platform. So that is literally bringing data together progressively into one place so we can present it in a very plain and simple way. We're all very digitally native. We all use our iPhones and our iPads to access digital material online. And we all get very frustrated when it's complicated. We want it to look easy and clear. And that's the purpose of this screen in this dashboard, is it presents very complex data in a very accessible and easy way. Next slide, please, Jim. If we were to touch and click on any of those panels that we were looking at previously, and we clicked on the one here that said members, you can then drill down into more analysis of the data, because it's great to have that top level view of the summaries of all that data brought together, but you rapidly want to get into asking questions and answering those questions and doing the analysis. So here's an example of member data in this scheme, in this dummy scheme we're presenting here. And you can see immediately on the left-hand side, we've presented it as geospatial data. So that is bringing in an external data source, the map, taking the postcode of the pension scheme members and laying it onto a map, so we can suddenly see a geospatial distribution. If you look across to the red bars, you can also see that this has given us the ability to do what we call a time series analysis. Is how is the data changing over time? So this data capture of bringing all the data into one place is not a snapshot, it's actually building up data over time. It's a time series approach, and we can present that out in this way. We also then, if you go further over to the lovely green and blue bars, we can then start looking at dimensions of the data. And I'm getting into data science here when we start talking about dimensions of data, because here we're talking about gender and age. So we're breaking down that data and presenting it by gender and age. And then if you were to be able to look a little bit lower, we'd look at another dimension of the data. We could then blend that with fund data. So you're looking at gender and age with fund data. So you can rapidly, once you have the data all in one place, you can start to do very complex analysis and starting to draw out the insight from the data. What I also like about this is that this is a very accessible view for anybody, but you can export all of this data as well. So whilst we've put this data in one place from all of the operational systems where we can access it and put this dashboard on top, you can also export the raw data, or you can actually stick other tools on top of it. This is not the only tool that we have sitting on top of this data. So it can drive internal operations as well as driving member engagement, member interaction, and deeper insight into member behavior, which is really what will help us understand member engagement. Next slide, please, Jim. So we were looking there very much as a data scientist view, perhaps, or a data analyst's view. This is actually the starting point of the dashboard. This is where a business user, a trustee, an administrator, or somebody in an HR team would actually access this data. And here is an even higher, more accessible top-level summary with guidance on how to use the data, or what the data is there and what it means, kind of like a data catalog, which is very important so people understand what they're looking at and how it can be used. So it's very important that when we bring all of this data together and we make it there available for deep analysis, we also make it very accessible to business users who perhaps most probably aren't data scientists. Emma, back to you.
Thanks, Peter. So let's go on to the next slide, Jim, because I really want to look further at some of the detail about how these data insights have actually been driving practical improvements. So when we're looking at the service levels, we can drill down to see how many calls were received over a period, and importantly, what were people calling about? And in this example, the bulk of the calls were asking for information, but the next most frequently asked question was, how do I get my money? Now, this is dummy data, but it really does reflect reality, as we've definitely seen an increase in this question as a result of COVID, especially we found when companies are undertaking redundancy exercises. And then, of course, once we have the data on what members are asking about, we can use this to prioritize improvements. So, for example, we've made it easier for members to access balances that are under £10,000 via a new Pay Me journey. That means that members can access their money via a phone call or an online process that gets them their money in 48 hours. And that's a much improved member experience. And really, it all came about because of the data that we'd seen and analysed. And then we've also been using data analytics to improve the content shown through our virtual online assistant or via web chat. And of course, usage of web chat has increased a lot through the pandemic. And actually, we've seen very high net promoter scores via our web chat as a result of making these improvements. So we could move on to the next slide, please, Jim. And another specific example is using the data to track the success of campaigns. So in this case, this is an example of a new client where we'd sent out welcome videos, which included a link for members to click through to register for online access to their accounts. And so here we can see exactly how many members registered and when they did so. So a huge surge of interest on the day the video was sent out, as was expected. But quite interestingly, there was a long tail of registrations for the days afterwards as well. And as Peter talked to us about, we could also analyse the demographics of who registered in terms of age, gender, and location. We could also see whether members accessed the video via our app on their phone, or in the days before COVID, when they were in the office, did they actually watch it on their work PC? And then, of course, all of these learnings can then be applied to make future campaigns ever more effective and targeted in order to drive up engagement. So moving on to the next slide, I'd just like to round off my examples with one that brings technology and data together. So Legal & General partnered with the fintech startup Tomello to create an online platform which gives members the opportunity to see the holdings in their portfolios and then to feed in how they would vote on key issues at the companies that they hold within their portfolios. Now, I know Georgia from Tomello has already spoken at the conference this morning, and we've really found that this technology presents a new angle that resonates with members that haven't really engaged before. And then, of course, the data we've been able to gain via this new technology feeds back into our communications program. And so the learning and development cycle continues to keep improving engagement and member outcomes. So just wanted to give you a few sort of key statistics from the pilot that we ran. So we ran a pilot, it was across over 1,000 people, across 2 schemes for 12 weeks, and it was from June 2020, so right in the middle of the pandemic period. What we found is that 3,700 votes were cast overall, an average of 3.3 votes per person, with the average user spending over 5 minutes on the platform each time. Now, as you might expect, high-profile companies and themes dominated member activity. So issues that have dominated headlines, such as should Mike Ashley be re-elected as CEO of Sports Direct, they proved very popular. And this is a really important learning, this one, is that we found that the platform was particularly effective with groups where engagement has often tended to be the lowest. So amongst people who are just starting on their pension savings journey and those with smaller pots, in temporary or part-time employment maybe, as the majority of our logins came from the 25 to 34 age bracket, which is really a breakthrough for bringing early savers into their pensions journey. And we think that we got those younger people looking at this is because it replicates familiar formats, so uses social media inspired likes, for examples, and it also gives members feedback on how their scheme peers and how their provider voted on these issues. So members could say, I want to vote in this way. They could see how other people were voting, and then they got response from the provider to say, we voted this way and why. So it was really interesting. We were a little bit worried that people would be upset if the investment manager voted differently to the way that they wanted to vote. But actually, we found that they like the feedback. So even if the investment manager didn't vote in the way they wanted, they still really appreciate the feedback. And so I think that this sort of idea of social media activated tools which address relevant issues, hopefully can help in switching a new generation of members onto pensions. And, it's sort of democratizing through technology. And I do think it's another step towards equalizing who has the power to make decisions about how capital is allocated. It's early days, but I think it's really interesting to see these findings. And these early signs are really encouraging. So the Tomello platform works in two ways for our members. So it's an awareness tool for those who are less familiar with their pension savings, and an engagement tool for those who are already confident with their money. And hopefully this kind of engagement will be more important as a gateway going forward to bring on those younger members and the less engaged into pensions. And you can also see some of the quotes that actually came back. Those are verbatim quotes that we had from the pilot. But I'd now like to hand back to Peter to wrap up the session for us.
Thank you very much, Emma. Could we move to the next slide, please, Jim? I'm just going to make a few comments about the future of data and tech, because I think the future is very exciting. The ability, as we've seen here, to analyze the data and understand different cohorts' behaviors in different ways helps us overcome assumptions where we may have assumed, for example, at Gen Z or the 19 to 24-year-olds were digitally native and therefore would interact with their pension scheme online. That assumption may be wrong, and we may need to interact with them in a different digital way. I think the other next point is that new tech is coming quickly, very quickly, but also new data and new ways of data is coming quickly. And so we have to have the ability, the platforms, the environments, the data environments where we can bring on board this new data very, very quickly and at speed. The other thing to stress about what we've done here, data for me is all about collecting, curating and contextualizing data. Those data sets don't really mean anything sitting alone. They need to go through what we call the 3 C's, which builds up into information, knowledge and insight. And that's what this platform that we've been looking at today has done. And those insights allow us then to step forward in the future into prediction about scheme behavior, member behaviors, but also into automation based on that prediction, and even move into super personalization in time. And finally, the last point there I think is crucially important, is around collaboration. And it's not only collaborating about technology and data, it's also about collaborating around those insights. And that will drive improved member outcomes. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much, Peter. We've already got one really great question that's come in. And yeah, how do you feel that data's been used and misused during the COVID-19 period? Starting with the politicians, we always have to start with them, but also, you know, how have the scientists used it, and then to the general public?
Is that one aimed at me, Emma, do you think?
It's definitely aimed at you, Peter. Yes, it has to be you for that one.
That's a huge question. I think we all know that during COVID, not only in the NHS and in WHO or any response, health response to COVID, but also in business as well, we've all wanted data faster so we can make more decisions more quickly, and some of them very, very important decisions. So COVID has driven that desire to have trusted data very, very quickly. Where has data been misused? I think some of that misuse has been inadvertent, with people not realizing they've misused data. And that comes back to a whole nother world and discussion around governance of data, and truly understanding what data you've got and what it can be used for, and what insights you can draw from that data. There have been perhaps a few examples of purposeful misuse of data. But I think data has driven our understanding of COVID and our responses. I know at L&G, we're using data to understand our return to work patterns and how we manage that across our large workforce. So data has been really, really important, I think, in the COVID response and COVID management.
Great. You weren't too nasty about the politicians or the scientists there. That's fine. So we've got a couple more good questions that I need to ask you. So do you think it's possible to bring external third-party data together securely? So, you know, an example would be members accessing IFAs for support at retirement. You know, can you get everything together in a way that's secure? Because I think one of the big worries about the new digital world is scams and misuse of data as well.
My simple answer to that, Emma, is yes, but then there's loads of caveats around that. Of course, you know, we operate in even post-Brexit, we'll operate in something that looks like a GDPR environment, where customer data has to be looked after and member data has to be looked after with the utmost security. And there are ways of doing this, but you have to build privacy by design into these things. It can't be an afterthought. but that the benefits that can be brought for the member or the customer by bringing external data sets in are worth that effort.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Peter. So we've got some more questions coming in. So, just thinking about that, having all the data in one place, how do you see the industry versions of the pensions dashboard? Obviously, really big issue for us in pensions, working with, say, legal and general data or tech such as you've shown us today.
Obviously, from my past at TPR, I've been involved in the pensions dashboard since 2016, so I know a fair amount about it. And I think that organisations like Legal & General bringing their data into one place, away from operational systems, makes it easier for us to interact with the dashboard and dashboard aspirations and timescales. So that's something that we need and have done. I think that on a larger scale, mirroring what we've kind of done at Legal & General is the approach the pensions dashboard is going to be following, bringing data together in one place. What has to be done, and I spend a lot of time, even though I'm a data scientist, I spend a lot of time talking about data governance and data cataloging. And when you bring data together, you really need to understand, is that an apple or is that a pear? Or can I compare this with this? Can I put this with that? Does it make sense? So there's a lot of work to be done in bringing data together, but we're on that trajectory without a doubt.
And then another question that's come in is, how does Brexit impact where data is stored?
We're not quite sure yet. Under GDPR, we could store data, and when we were part of Europe and members of the General Data Protection Regulation, we could store data anywhere within the EEA, which is slightly different to the European Union, but it's a wider area, but it's European countries, and we had to have agreement to move European citizens' data or data collected in Europe outside of that area, say to North America. Post-Brexit, we will have what's called an equivalence. In other words, our data protection regime under the ICO should be accepted by the European Union as an equivalent to GDPR. It should be, because it's pretty much the same. So that's what we're working towards. If we get that equivalence, then the rules won't change.
Okay, good. So fingers crossed on that one, that we get that equivalence then. And yeah, an interesting one at the bottom here. Do you have plans, to introduce ESG data into the tool for employers? Carbon scores, all of that kind of thing. It's such a hot topic now, Peter.
Yeah, and I think that's the point we made earlier on, Emma, about this being an iterative approach, about adding more data sets when they're required or when there is a demand or a need. ESG data, as you know, Emma, is a big data set and something we're using elsewhere in LGIM and across the group. So yes, I don't see why we wouldn't bring that ESG data into this place, draw it from those places and bring it into this data store for this platform.
And I think one of the challenges that we're finding at the moment, Peter, with some of this ESG data is just having the common standards. Presumably we'd need that in order for it to be really useful.
It comes back to that data dictionary, taxonomy, standards. You're absolutely right. You've got to compare apples with apples.
And then I think I've asked all of the questions that we've got, but just, since you've been involved with the dashboard for so long, Peter, really like to get a little bit more of your views on the dashboard and where it's going. And, really now we've seen some of the timelines, is it moving fast enough, do you think?
Oh, you put me on the spot there, Emma, and you haven't briefed me on this one.
No, I haven't. No. Just thought I'd throw this in for you.
I think from a data point of view, my concern from 2016 has always been an over concentration on what it might look like, even down to sort of colours and button shapes and what the user may see in terms of its visual access, and not enough concentration has been on the data behind it, because the digital platform that the dashboard may be is fantastic, but without good quality assured data behind it, it's not worth it. And if members aren't seeing stuff that they trust, then they won't engage with the dashboard. They just think it's a waste of time, or if the data sets aren't complete. So that's my view, and I think that's one of the biggest tasks that we've got to tackle.
That's great, Peter. Right, well, we're pretty much at time for our session. So thanks to everyone for their engagement, for their questions. And I think I'll just round it up by saying thank you very much to you, Peter, and to everyone who's been at the session. Thank you very much,
It's a pleasure,
everybody.
Emma. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Cheers. Bye, everyone.
Bye.